poor girl forced to marry a rich gay man to pay her mother's loan. Hi, my most precious and cherished story family. My heart is overflowing with the deepest love and gratitude as we gather once again in our sacred space of storytelling. Each one of you is a precious gift, a beautiful soul who brings light to this journey we share together. A sacred prayer from my heart to yours, divine creator of love and light. Today I lift up every precious member of our story, family. Wrap them in your infinite love and tender care. When tears fall, may they know they're not alone. When joy comes, may it overflow in abundance. When darkness surrounds, light their path with hope. Heal every wounded heart, every silent pain. Bless every dream they hold dear. Protect their loved ones near and far. Fill their homes with laughter and peace. Guide their steps through life's challenges and remind them daily of their infinite worth. For they are not just readers of stories, they are bearers of light, keepers of hope, precious souls who make this world more beautiful. By their very presence, let them feel your love in every sunrise, your comfort in every gentle breeze, your strength in every storm. And know they are cherished beyond measure, not just by you, but by this entire story family forever and always. Amen. My beloved family, as we prepare to begin our new journey together, I want you to know that this story comes straight from my heart to yours. It's a tale of profound love, unshakable faith, and the extraordinary power of human connection. Now let me address something from our last story. I need to sincerely apologize about the chapter confusion with Binta's editing. These things can happen, but I take full responsibility and promise to be more careful moving forward. Your reading experience matters greatly to me. Before we step into this new world together, please take a moment to feel the love surrounding you. Feel the connection we share across time and space. Know that in this story family, you are never alone. Your joys are our joys, your tears are our tears, and your hopes are our hopes. Are your hearts ready to receive this gift of love? Shall we begin this magical journey together? Let us step hand in hand into a world where love knows no boundaries, where hope never dies, and where miracles happen every day. Chapter 1. The Devil's Bargain. The autumn rain hammered against the hospital windows with an urgency that matched Bondi Quincy's racing heart. The sterile corridors of San Francisco General Hospital seemed to stretch endlessly before her as she made her way to the oncology ward, her worn ballet flats silent against the polished floors. The scent of antiseptic and despair clung to the air, a constant reminder of the battle her mother had been fighting for the past 8 months. Room 412 had become a second home to Bondi, its pale blue walls and beeping monitors more familiar than her own bedroom. Her mother, Adeline Quincy, lay propped against starched white pillows, her once vibrant dark skin now ashen, her strong hands reduced to delicate bird bones beneath paper-thin skin. The sight never failed to steal Bondi's breath away. "Baby girl," Adeline whispered, her voice rough from the latest round of chemotherapy. "You shouldn't spend every evening here. You're young, you should be living your life." Bondi settled into the chair beside the bed, taking her mother's frail hand between both of hers. "This is exactly where I need to be, Mama. Besides, the gallery is closed on Mondays anyway." She forced a smile, not mentioning that she'd been laid off from her assistant curator position 3 weeks ago. The medical bills had piled up faster than she could manage on her modest salary, and the gallery's downsizing had been the final blow. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor filled the silence between them as Bondi studied her mother's face, memorizing every line and shadow. Adeline had once been the most beautiful woman in their neighborhood, turning heads with her graceful walk and radiant smile. Now, cancer was stealing her away piece by piece, and Bondi felt powerless to stop it. The click of expensive heels against Bondi's stepmother was a vision in cream cashmere and perfectly styled auburn hair. Her crimson lips curved into what might have been a smile or a sneer. With Victoria, it was often hard to tell the difference. "Darling Adeline," Victoria purred, gliding into the room like she owned it. In a way, she did. Her name was on all the medical bills since Bondi's father had passed away 5 years ago. "How are you feeling today?" Adeline managed a weak smile. "I've had better days, Victoria." Victoria's diamond rings caught the harsh fluorescent light as she waved her hand dismissively. "Well, I might have something to brighten everyone's spirits." She turned her calculating gaze to Bondi. "I've been doing some thinking about our situation." Bondi tensed. Whenever Victoria started thinking, it usually meant trouble. Her stepmother had a way of turning every situation to her advantage, especially if it involved making Bondi's life more difficult. "You remember Bobby Brett, don't you?" Victoria continued, settling herself into the room's only comfortable chair. "The tech mogul who's been making waves in Silicon Valley." Bondi's heart skipped a beat. Everyone in San Francisco knew about Bobby Brett, the enigmatic CEO of Brett Tech, whose face regularly graced the covers of business magazines and gossip tabloids alike. His company had revolutionized clean energy technology, making him one of the youngest billionaires in the country. But it wasn't his business acumen that kept him in the headlines. "The gay one?" Adeline asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one they're always writing about in those terrible papers." Victoria's smile widened. "The very same, though he prefers to keep that particular aspect of his life private, which is precisely where our opportunity lies." A cold dread settled in Bondi's stomach. She knew that look in Victoria's eyes, the same look she'd had when she'd convinced Bondi's father to change his will, leaving Victoria in control of the family's finances after his death. "What opportunity?" Bondi asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. Victoria leaned forward, her expensive perfume overwhelming the hospital's antiseptic smell. "Bobby Brett needs a wife. Someone beautiful, intelligent, and most importantly discreet. Someone who can help him maintain the right image for his board of directors and his more conservative investors." The implications of Victoria's words hit Bondi like a physical blow. "You want me to marry a gay man? Are you insane?" "I want you to save your mother's life," Victoria countered, her voice hard as steel beneath its silky surface. The experimental treatment in Switzerland could be her only chance, but it costs $5 million. Money that, need I remind you, we don't have. Unless... Bondi glanced at her mother, who had fallen into an uneasy sleep, her face twisted with pain even in unconsciousness. The doctors had given her 6 months without the treatment. With it, she might have years. "Bobby Brett is willing to pay handsomely for the right candidate," Victoria continued. $5 million to be exact. Enough for the treatment with plenty left over to ensure your mother's comfort during recovery. "And how exactly do you know what Bobby Brett wants?" Bondi demanded, though she already suspected the answer. Victoria's smile turned triumphant. "I may own a small percentage of Brett Tech's stock, and I may have had a very interesting conversation with certain members of the board who are concerned about their CEO's personal life affecting their bottom line." The rain continued its assault on the windows as Bondi's world tilted on its axis. She looked at her mother's sleeping form, at the machines keeping track of her weakening vital signs, at the charts showing the cancer's relentless spread through her body. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because you're perfect, darling. You're beautiful enough to be believable as the woman who turned him, but not so beautiful that people will question his previous preferences. You're intelligent enough to handle the society circles, but not ambitious enough to cause problems. And most importantly," Victoria's voice dropped to a near whisper, "you're desperate enough to say yes." Bondi's hands clenched into fists, her nails cutting into her palms. "And what's in it for you?" "Smart girl," Victoria praised coldly. "Let's just say that my cooperation in this matter will be well compensated. After all, I do own those shares in Brett Tech, and it would be a shame if certain rumors about their CEO were to affect the stock price." The heart monitor's steady beeping filled the silence as Bondi stared at her mother. Adeline had sacrificed everything to give Bondi a good life after her father's first wife died. She'd worked 3 jobs to put Bondi through college, had encouraged her dreams of working in the art world, had loved her unconditionally. And now, when Adeline needed her most, what was Bondi willing to sacrifice in return? "How long?" Bondi asked, her voice hollow. 2 years, Victoria replied. "Long enough to quiet the rumors and stabilize the company's image. After that, a quiet, amicable divorce. You'll be set for life, your mother will be healthy, and everyone gets what they want." Bondi thought of Bobby Brett, the man she'd only seen in photographs. His storm grey eyes always seemed to hold a deep sadness, even when he was smiling for the cameras. What kind of desperation would drive a man like him to agree to such an arrangement? "I want it in writing," Bondi said finally, her voice stronger than she felt. "Everything. The money for Mama's treatment, the timeline, all of it." Victoria's smile was pure victory. "Of course, darling. I'll have the lawyers draw up the contracts immediately." She rose gracefully, adjusting her cashmere wrap. "Oh, and Bondi?" "You'll need a new wardrobe. Can't have Bobby Brett's fiancée looking like a thrift store mannequin. I'll send my stylist tomorrow." As Victoria's heels clicked away down the corridor, Bondi looked out at the rain-soaked city. Somewhere out there, in one of those gleaming towers piercing the fog, Bobby Brett was probably thinking about their arrangement, about the stranger who would become his wife. A nurse came in to adjust Adeline's medication, her movements efficient and practiced. "She's fighting hard," the nurse said kindly, "but sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes you need a miracle." Bondi watched a raindrop trace its way down the window, joining others in their journey to the ground. "Sometimes," she whispered, "you have to make your own miracles." The rain continued to fall as night settled over San Francisco, washing away everything but the weight of the devil's bargain Bondi had just made. Her freedom for her mother's life, her future for a chance to save the only person who had ever truly loved her. In the distance, lightning split the sky, illuminating the Brett Tech Tower for a brief, brilliant moment. Tomorrow, Bondi would begin her new life as Bobby Brett's fiancée. Tonight, she would hold her mother's hand and pray she was strong enough for whatever came next. Chapter 2. The Glass Tower. The Brett Tech headquarters pierced the San Francisco skyline like a silver blade against the morning fog, its glass and steel facade reflecting the pale winter sunlight. Bondi Quincy stood at its base, her newly styled hair and designer outfit feeling like a costume rather than clothing. Victoria's stylist had worked her magic over the past week, transforming Bondi from an art gallery assistant into someone who could believably stand beside one of the world's youngest billionaires. The Louboutin heels Victoria had insisted on clicked against the marble floor of the lobby as Bondi approached the security desk. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she forced her expression to remain neutral, channeling the quiet confidence she'd observed in the society women who used to frequent her gallery. "Bondi Quincy for Mr. Brett," she said, proud that her voice didn't waver. "I have an appointment." The security guard's eyes widened slightly in recognition. Clearly, word of her impending engagement had already circulated through the building. "Of course, Miss Quincy. Please place your hand on the scanner." The biometric scanner hummed beneath her palm, and a green light flashed. A sleek badge materialized from a slot in the desk, bearing her photo, taken from her driver's license, she realized, and the designation, Executive Access. "Mr. Brett's private elevator is to the left," the guard explained, gesturing toward a discreet hallway. Your badge will grant you access to the penthouse level. The private elevator was lined with mirrors, forcing Bondi to confront her transformed reflection from every angle. The woman staring back at her wore a tailored Alexander McQueen suit in deep burgundy, its clean lines and subtle details screaming quiet wealth. Her dark skin glowed with expensive products, and her naturally curly hair had been styled into elegant waves that framed her face perfectly. She looked like she belonged in this world of glass and steel, of billion-dollar deals and corporate intrigue. She looked like a lie. The elevator rode smoothly to the top of the tower, giving no indication of its movement except for the changing numbers on the digital display. 45, 46, 47. Each floor bringing her closer to the man she would have to convince the world she loved. The penthouse level opened directly into a vast reception area, all polished concrete and modern art pieces that made Bondi's fingers itch to examine them closer. A tall woman with close-cropped silver hair rose from behind a floating glass desk. "Ms. Quincy," she said, her tone professionally warm. "I'm Ms. Reynolds, Mr. Brett's executive assistant. He's expecting you in his office. Would you like coffee? Water?" "No, thank you," Bondi replied, following Ms. Reynolds down a corridor lined with what appeared to be original Rothko paintings. In another life, she would have stopped to study them, to lose herself in their depths. Instead, she forced herself to keep walking, her heels silent now on the plush carpet. Ms. Reynolds stopped before a set of double doors in dark wood. "Mr. Brett is on a call, but he asked that you wait inside. He won't be long." She opened one door and gestured Bondi through, closing it softly behind her. Bobby Brett's office was larger than Bondi's entire apartment. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the bay, the Golden Gate Bridge barely visible through the lingering morning fog. The space was minimally furnished with pieces that probably cost more than she'd made in her entire career. A massive desk in dark wood and steel, a seating area with low-slung leather chairs, and a wall of books that made her heart skip a beat. And there, standing with his back to her, was Bobby Brett himself. He was taller than she'd expected, his broad shoulders evident even under the precise tailoring of his charcoal suit. One hand was pushed into his pocket while the other held a phone to his ear, his stance radiating contained power and authority. "No, that won't work," he was saying, his voice low and controlled, but with an edge that made Bondi glad she wasn't on the other end of the call. "The parameters were clear from the beginning. If they can't meet them, we'll find someone who can." A pause. "Then I suggest you figure it out quickly. We're not extending the deadline." He ended the call and stayed facing the windows for a moment longer, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Bondi took the opportunity to study him, to memorize the details she would need to know as his fiancée. The way his dark hair was perfectly styled, except for one rebellious wave at his temple. The slight tension in his shoulders that spoke of too many hours at his desk. The way his left hand flexed slightly at his side, as if reaching for something just out of grasp. When he finally turned to face her, Bondi's breath caught. Photos hadn't done justice to his eyes. Storm grey and haunted, yes, but also sharp with intelligence and something else, something that looked almost like desperation. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, two strangers about to become intimately entwined in each other's lives. "Ms. Quincy," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming." "Mr. Brett." She was proud that her voice remained steady. "I believe we have some things to discuss." He gestured to the seating area, and Bondi moved to take one of the leather chairs, carefully crossing her ankles the way Victoria had drilled into her. Bobby remained standing, moving to a sideboard that held a selection of crystal decanters. "Drink?" he offered, though his tone suggested it wasn't really a question. "Please." He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into heavy crystal glasses, handling them with the ease of someone who'd grown up around such luxury. When he handed one to Bondi, their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt him tense at the contact. "Let's be clear," he said, settling into the chair across from her but perching on its edge as if ready to flee. "This is a business arrangement, nothing more. 2 years of marriage, public appearances, and absolute discretion. In return, your mother gets the best medical care money can buy, and you get a comfortable life afterward." Bondi took a sip of what turned out to be exceptionally smooth whiskey, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "Why me?" she asked finally, meeting his guarded gaze. "There must be dozens of women who'd jump at the chance to become Mrs. Brett, even knowing the circumstances." A bitter smile touched his lips. "Because your stepmother owns enough Brett Tech shares to cause problems at my next board meeting. Because she has a talent for spinning stories that could damage this company's reputation. And," his expression softened almost imperceptibly, "because you have kind eyes." The simple observation caught her off guard. "What do my eyes have to do with anything?" "Kind eyes don't judge," he said quietly, looking away. "And there's been enough judgment in my life already." The weight of unspoken pain in his words made Bondi's chest tight. She thought of all the tabloid headlines she'd seen about him over the years, the speculation about his sexuality, the cruel jokes, the constant scrutiny. "I won't judge you," she said softly, "but I need to know what I'm getting into. What exactly will be expected of me?" Bobby set his glass down and stood, moving restlessly to the windows. "Public appearances, charity events, board member dinners. You'll need to be seen at the right places, say the right things, play the part of the devoted fiancé and then wife. We'll live together. I have a penthouse in Pacific Heights that should suit our needs. Separate bedrooms, of course." "Of course," Bondi echoed, trying to imagine living in such close quarters with this complex, wounded man. "The press will want a love story," he continued, his reflection sharp against the fog beyond the glass. "We'll tell them we met through mutual friends, that it was a whirlwind romance. They'll eat it up, the ruthless CEO brought to his knees by love." His tone turned bitter again. The gay man turned straight by the right woman. "I won't let them say that," Bondi said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "I won't be used to perpetuate harmful stereotypes about sexuality. We can give them their love story without making it about converting you." He turned back to her, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "No, you won't be used. That's precisely why Victoria suggested you. You have principles, Ms. Quincy. Integrity. It makes you believable." "Please," she said, "if we're going to be engaged, you should call me Bondi." A ghost of a real smile touched his lips. "Bondi," he repeated as if testing the name. "And you should call me Bobby. At least when we're not in public. In front of others, you'll need to call me Robert. It's more respectable," she supplied. "Expected," he corrected. "Everything about this needs to meet expectations. The board, the investors, the public. They all have an image of what the CEO of Brett Tech should be, who he should love, how he should live. And you're willing to live a lie to meet those expectations." His expression hardened. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes to protect what I've built. This company isn't just about making money. We're developing technologies that could help solve the climate crisis, revolutionize renewable energy. I won't let prejudice and small-mindedness destroy that." Bondi stood, drawn to his passion despite herself. "And what about your happiness, your chance at real love?" "Happiness is a luxury I can't afford," he said flatly. "And love? Love isn't in the cards for someone like me. Not the kind of love the world would accept." The sadness in his voice made Bondi want to reach out, to offer some comfort, but she held herself back. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. Her own happiness wasn't part of the equation either. This was about saving her mother's life, nothing else. "The contracts are being drawn up," Bobby continued, all business again. My lawyers will send them to you tomorrow for review. Once they're signed, we'll need to move quickly. The annual shareholders meeting is in 3 weeks. That's when we'll announce our engagement. 3 weeks? Bondi's head spun. That's so soon. Time is a luxury we don't have, he said grimly. The board is getting restless, and your stepmother is getting impatient. Do you need more time with your mother before this begins? The reminder of why she was doing this steadied her. Number, the sooner we start, the sooner she can begin treatment. Bobby nodded, then moved to his desk and pressed a button. Almost immediately, Ms. Reynolds appeared in the doorway. Ms. Reynolds will help coordinate everything. Your move to the penthouse, your wardrobe, your social calendar. She'll also arrange for your mother's transfer to a private medical facility where she'll be more comfortable. The efficiency of it all was both impressive and slightly terrifying. In the space of an hour, Bondi's entire life was being rearranged like pieces on a chessboard. One more thing, Bobby said as Ms. Reynolds led her toward the door. Trust no one with the truth. Not your friends, not your colleagues, not even your mother. The fewer people who know this is an arrangement, the better. Bondi turned back to look at him, this man who was about to become the center of her world. I understand. But will you trust me? For a moment, the mask slipped, and she saw raw vulnerability in his eyes. I don't have a choice, he said softly. We're in this together now. As the elevator carried her back down to the ground floor, Bondi caught her reflection again in the mirrored walls. She looked exactly the same as she had going up, but everything had changed. She was no longer just Bondi Quincy, art lover and devoted daughter. She was about to become one half of San Francisco's most talked about couple, the woman who had supposedly captured the heart of Bobby Brett. The doors opened onto the lobby and Bondi stepped out into her new life, the weight of secrets and promises heavy on her shoulders. Above her, in his glass tower, Bobby Brett was probably already back at work, moving the pieces that would bind their lives together. The fog had lifted while she was upstairs, revealing a clear blue sky. But Bondi knew that clarity was an illusion. Her world had just become infinitely more complicated, and there was no turning back. Chapter 3. Masks and Mirrors. The Grace Cathedral stood majestic against the San Francisco sky, its Gothic spires reaching toward heaven like prayers made of stone. Inside, hundreds of white orchids cascaded from every arch, their delicate petals catching the light that streamed through the stained glass windows. Bondi stood in the bride's chamber, staring at her reflection in a full-length mirror while an army of stylists made final adjustments to her Vera Wang gown. The dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and delicate lace. Its cost enough to have funded several months of her mother's original treatment. Every detail had been chosen to create the perfect image. The demure neckline speaking of class, the fitted bodice highlighting her figure without being provocative, the flowing skirt suggesting romance rather than sexuality. Even her makeup had been carefully calibrated, enhancing her natural beauty while ensuring she photographed well for the society pages. "You look absolutely perfect," Victoria purred, circling Bondi like a well-dressed shark. Her stepmother wore Mother of the Bride rose gold, though she'd made sure her outfit cost more than Bondi's dress. Bobby won't know what hit him. Bondi met Victoria's eyes in the mirror. "We both know that's not true." Victoria's smile turned sharp. "What matters is what everyone else believes, darling. And right now, everyone believes they're about to witness the society wedding of the decade." She adjusted one of Bondi's curls with perfectly manicured fingers. The ruthless tech mogul and the beautiful gallery assistant. It's like a modern fairy tale. "More like a Greek tragedy," Bondi muttered, but Victoria had already moved on, directing the photographers who'd been granted exclusive access to the bride's preparations. A soft knock at the door provided brief respite from the circus. Ms. Reynolds entered, elegant as always in a tailored navy suit. "5 minutes, Miss Quincy," Mr. Brett is in position." Bondi nodded, her throat tight. She hadn't seen Bobby in 3 days. Not since their last casual public appearance at a charity gala. They'd perfected their performance over the past weeks. The lingering touches, the intimate whispers, the way they seemed to gravitate toward each other in any room. The press had eaten it up, spinning tales of whirlwind romance and love at first sight. The reality was far more complex. Living together in his Pacific Heights penthouse had been an exercise in careful choreography. They developed routines, breakfast meetings to coordinate schedules, shared car rides to maintain appearances, quiet evenings in their separate spaces. Sometimes late at night they'd meet in the kitchen or library, sharing comfortable silence or careful conversation. In those moments, Bondi caught glimpses of the real Bobby, brilliant, wounded, funny in an understated way, and carrying a weight of expectations that would crush most people. "It's time," Ms. Reynolds announced, breaking into Bondi's thoughts. The wedding march began to play as Bondi took her position at the cathedral's massive doors. She'd insisted on walking herself down the aisle. Her father was gone, and she refused to let Victoria claim that role. The heavy doors swung open, and hundreds of faces turned to watch her entrance. The cathedral was packed with San Francisco's elite, tech billionaires, venture capitalists, old money families, and carefully selected celebrities. Reporters lined the back wall, their cameras clicking rapidly, but Bondi saw none of them. Her eyes were fixed on Bobby, standing at the altar in a Tom Ford tuxedo that made him look like he'd stepped out of a classic film. He was playing his part perfectly, his expression a masterful blend of awe and devotion as she approached. But Bondi had learned to read the tiny signs of his distress, the slight tension in his jaw, the way his left hand kept trying to form a fist at his side. She wanted to tell him it would be okay, that they would get through this together, but such reassurances weren't part of their script. The ceremony passed in a blur of traditional vows and carefully staged moments. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, Bobby cupped her face with trembling hands and kissed her with exquisite gentleness. The cathedral erupted in applause, camera flashes turning the moment into a storm of light. The reception was held at the Fairmont, its grand ballroom transformed into a winter wonderland of crystal and silver. Bondi and Bobby performed their first dance to At Last, Victoria's Choice, meant to emphasize the narrative of their supposedly inevitable romance. As they moved across the dance floor, Bobby pulled her closer than strictly necessary. "You're trembling?" he whispered against her ear, making it look like an intimate moment for the cameras. "So are you," she whispered back. His hand tightened on her waist. "I'm sorry about all this. The spectacle, the lies." "Don't be." We both knew what we were getting into. The song ended, and other couples joined them on the dance floor. Victoria danced past with a board member, her smile triumphant. She'd gotten everything she wanted: money, social status, and the power that came from orchestrating San Francisco's wedding of the year. Later, after most of the guests had left and the remaining ones were too drunk to notice, Bondi and Bobby escaped to a quiet balcony overlooking the city. The fog was rolling in, wrapping the buildings in ethereal silver. "I need to tell you my story," Bobby said suddenly, staring out at the fog. "You deserve to know what you've married into." Bondi leaned against the balcony railing, giving him space while staying close enough to maintain appearances if anyone looked out. "You don't have to. I do." He took a deep breath. "I've spent millions on treatments, therapy, trying to fix what society said was broken. My father, he couldn't accept a gay son running his empire. The shame nearly destroyed me. There's nothing to fix," Bondi said softly. "You're not broken." He turned to look at her, his eyes vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "I wish I'd believed that years ago. Instead, I let them convince me there was something wrong with me. Conversion therapy, experimental treatments, psychological reprogramming. I tried it all. Nothing worked, of course. You can't change who you are. But you're still trying to hide it. I'm trying to protect what matters, he corrected. BrettTech employs thousands of people. Our clean energy initiatives could help combat climate change. I can't let personal issues jeopardize that. Your happiness isn't a personal issue, Bobby. It's your life. He smiled sadly. My life stopped being my own the day I took over the company. But maybe we can help each other find some peace in all this. A waiter appeared with champagne, and they raised their glasses in a mock toast to their future. The crystal rang with a clear, pure note that seemed to hang in the fog-laden air. To masks, Bobby murmured. And the faces beneath them, Bondi finished. They returned to the ballroom for the final traditions, cutting the cake, saying goodbye to remaining guests, posing for last-minute photos. Victoria caught Bondi's arm as they prepared to leave. "Remember what's at stake," she hissed under her smile. "One wrong move, one slip in your performance, and everything falls apart." Bondi pulled her arm free. "I remember exactly what's at stake. Do you?" The wedding night was spent in the penthouse's separate wings, each of them alone with their thoughts. Bondi sat at her window, watching the city lights blur in the fog, while somewhere on the other side of the vast apartment, Bobby probably did the same. In the morning, they would begin their life together properly, appearances to maintain, a story to sell, a carefully constructed illusion to preserve. But for now, in the quiet hours between their public performance and their private reality, Bondi allowed herself to feel the weight of what they'd done. She thought of her mother, now receiving treatment in Switzerland's finest private clinic. She thought of Bobby, carrying the burden of others' expectations. She thought of Victoria, playing her games of power and manipulation. And she thought of herself, wearing a wedding ring that felt both too heavy and somehow not heavy enough. The fog continued to roll in, obscuring the sharp edges of the city until everything was soft and indistinct. It was fitting, Bondi thought, for a marriage built on illusions. But somewhere beneath the fog, beneath the masks they wore and the roles they played, there was truth waiting to be discovered. The question was whether they were brave enough to find it. Chapter 4. Learning to Dance. Living with Bobby Brett was like learning a complex dance, each step carefully measured, each movement choreographed to perfection. After 2 months of marriage, Bondi had mastered the rhythm of their shared life. The public performances, the private silences, the delicate balance between truth and illusion. Their mornings began with breakfast meetings in the penthouse's gleaming kitchen, scheduling their public appearances while sharing coffee from the elaborate espresso machine that Bobby treated like a beloved pet. He took his black, she preferred honey and cream, and somehow that small detail had become a comfortable constant in their carefully constructed world. "The tech conference in Seattle next week," Bobby said one morning, scrolling through his tablet while absently stirring his coffee. "The organizers want us both there. They're pushing the power couple angle, tech visionary and art curator, bringing different worlds together." Bondi looked up from the gallery exhibition catalogue she'd been studying. Since their marriage, she'd been offered a position as head curator at a prestigious gallery, carefully orchestrated by Ms. Reynolds to maintain their social standing. "I thought that was just a day trip." "They've added a gala dinner. We'll need to stay overnight." He glanced at her, his expression apologetic. "I know you wanted to visit your mother this weekend." "I'll reschedule," Bondi said, ignoring the pang in her chest. Her mother was responding well to the treatment in Switzerland, but every missed visit felt like a small betrayal. "The board members' wives will be there, and their husbands. It's important we make a good impression." His fingers tightened on his cup. "Harrison Chemical is considering a major investment in our new solar technology." Bondi recognized the tension in his voice. James Harrison was one of the most conservative members of Brett Tech's board, and his support was crucial for Bobby's clean energy initiatives. "I'll wear the blue Valentino," she said, "the one that makes me look like a respectable corporate wife." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're getting good at this. I had an excellent teacher." She returned his smile, remembering the hours he'd spent preparing her for their public life, teaching her about the tech industry, coaching her on which board members needed special attention, showing her how to deflect personal questions with practiced ease. The penthouse had become their sanctuary, a space where they could let their masks slip, if only slightly. Bondi had filled her wing with art books and the small treasures she'd brought from her old life, while Bobby's domain remained minimalist except for his massive library. But they'd begun to share the common spaces more comfortably, finding peace in each other's quiet company. Late one evening, after a particularly exhausting charity event, Bondi found Bobby in the library. He'd loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, revealing the strong forearms she'd learned to appreciate during their staged, intimate moments. He was staring at a chessboard, lost in thought. "Do you play?" she asked, slipping off her heels and curling into one of the leather armchairs. "My father taught me," he replied, not looking up. "He said it was essential for business, learning to think several moves ahead, to sacrifice pieces for strategic advantage." Sounds lonely. His eyes met hers. It was. Everything was about strategy, about winning, even... He trailed off, but Bondi understood. Even his sexuality had been treated as a problem to be solved, a weakness to be overcome. "Teach me?" she asked, moving to sit across from him at the chessboard. He raised an eyebrow. "You want to learn chess at midnight?" "I want to understand you better." The words slipped out before she could stop them, more honest than they usually allowed themselves to be. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, vulnerability, and something else she couldn't quite name. "All right," he said softly, "but I warn you, I'm a demanding teacher." They spent the next hour bent over the board, his deep voice explaining moves and strategies while their fingers brushed occasionally over the pieces. Bondi lost spectacularly, but she found herself more interested in watching Bobby relax, seeing glimpses of the man behind the CEO facade. "You're a natural at this," he said, as they reset the board. "You think creatively, see patterns others might miss. Is that a compliment from the great Bobby Brett? Don't let it go to your head." But he was smiling, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger, less burdened. Their midnight chess games became a tradition, a private ritual that belonged only to them. Sometimes they talked about art, technology, their dreams for the future. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, letting the quiet of the night wrap around them like a protective cocoon. One evening, Bondi noticed Bobby studying a small painting she'd hung in the library, an abstract piece in deep blues and golds. "You like it?" she asked. "It's alive," he said thoughtfully, "like it's trying to break free of the canvas." His insight surprised her. That's exactly what the artist intended. It's about transformation, about becoming something new while holding on to your essential self. He turned to look at her, his expression intense. "Is that possible? To change without losing yourself?" "I think we're both finding out." Their conversation was interrupted by Ms. Reynolds, arriving early for their morning meeting. But something had shifted between them, a tiny crack in the walls they'd built around their hearts. Bondi threw herself into her work at the gallery, finding satisfaction in curating exhibitions that challenged and inspired. Bobby noticed her passion, secretly enrolling her in advanced art history courses and supporting her vision for more daring shows. "Your stepmother kept you small," he observed one evening as they reviewed proposals for a new exhibition. "It's time for you to grow." The simple statement touched something deep in Bondi's heart. She looked at him, this complex man who was slowly becoming more than just her business partner in an elaborate charade. "Why do you care about my growth?" He seemed startled by the question. Because you deserve to be more than just my wife for show. You're brilliant, Bondi. The world should see that." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. Then his phone buzzed with a board member's message, and reality rushed back in. But the moment lingered, coloring their interactions with new awareness. Bondi found herself noticing things she'd tried to ignore. The grace of his movements, the intelligence in his eyes, the way his presence made her feel simultaneously safe and off balance. At public events, their practiced intimacy began to feel less practiced. When Bobby's hand rested on her lower back, when he leaned in to whisper commentary about particularly pompous executives, when they danced close at charity galas. It all carried an undercurrent of genuine connection that both thrilled and terrified them. The press continued to follow their every move, spinning tales of deepening love and possible pregnancy rumors. Victoria watched with calculating eyes, reminding them regularly of the stakes involved. But in their private moments, in the quiet spaces between their public performances, something real was growing. One rainy Sunday, Bondi found Bobby in the penthouse's gym, punching a heavy bag with focused intensity. She'd never seen him like this. Raw, physical, his usual control stripped away by whatever demons he was fighting. "Bad day?" she asked softly. He caught the bag, steadying it as he turned to face her. Sweat darkened his shirt, and his eyes held a storm of emotions. "Board meeting tomorrow. Harrison's pushing back on the solar initiative again. Tell me." And he did, letting out his frustrations about the conservative board members who cared more about quarterly profits than long-term impact, about the pressure to maintain a perfect image while fighting for what he believed in, about the exhaustion of constantly proving himself. Bondi listened, offering support without judgment. When he finally fell silent, she stepped closer, laying a hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this anymore." He covered her hand with his, and they stood like that for a long moment, connected by touch and understanding. The rain drummed against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. "Sometimes," he whispered, "I forget this isn't real." But wasn't it? The thought lingered in Bondi's mind as she lay awake that night, listening to the rain. Their marriage might have begun as a business arrangement, but something else was taking root in the spaces between their careful choreography. They were learning a new dance, one without prescribed steps or calculated moves, one that scared them both with its potential for genuine feeling. Whether they were brave enough to follow its lead remained to be seen. The rain continued to fall, a gentle accompaniment to the rhythm of their evolving relationship, while somewhere in the vast penthouse, Bobby Brett probably lay awake too, wondering when exactly their performance had started to feel like truth. Chapter 5. The Enemy. Within the private hospital suite in Switzerland was a world away from San Francisco General, where Bondi had spent so many sleepless nights. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the fresh flowers that arrived daily from the hospital's private gardens. But it was her mother's smile that truly brightened the room. Adeline Quincy was responding remarkably well to the experimental treatment, her strength returning bit by bit. "You look different, baby girl," Adeline said, studying her daughter's face with a mother's knowing eyes. "Marriage agrees with you." Bondi adjusted the cashmere blanket covering her mother's legs, buying time to compose her expression. "The treatments are working. That's all that matters." Bobby Brett is a good man, Adeline continued. I see the way he looks at you when he visits, like you're some kind of miracle he can't quite believe in. The observation struck too close to the complicated truth of her relationship with Bobby. Their carefully maintained facade had begun to blur around the edges, moments of genuine connection seeping through the cracks in their performance. The midnight chess games, the shared confidences, the way his hand now sought hers automatically in moments of stress. It was becoming harder to distinguish between what was real and what was for show. He's different than I expected, Bondi admitted, which was true enough. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Victoria swept into the room like a perfectly styled storm cloud, her Hermes scarf trailing dramatically behind her. "Darling Adeline," she cooed, air kissing somewhere near her stepdaughter-in-law's cheek. "You're looking so much better. This Swiss air must be magical." Bondi tensed, recognizing the predatory gleam in Victoria's eyes. Her stepmother never appeared without purpose, and her timing was suspiciously perfect, just as Adeline was showing significant improvement. "I'll get some tea," Bondi said, squeezing her mother's hand before leaving the room. But instead of heading to the hospital cafe, she lingered just outside the door, her heart pounding. "The treatments are working wonderfully," she heard Victoria say, "though the costs are mounting faster than expected. The experimental phase is proving quite expensive." "But Bobby," Adeline's voice was uncertain. "Oh dear, Bobby is generous, of course, but there are conditions, expectations. Bondi needs to be more convincing in her role." Bondi's hands clenched into fists. So this was Victoria's game, using her mother's health as leverage again. "What do you mean?" Adeline asked. "Well, there are rumors, you see. Questions about the nature of their relationship. Bobby needs a wife who can make certain aspects of his life appear more conventional. Bondi's performance has been adequate, but there's room for improvement." Bondi had heard enough. She stormed back into the room, fury radiating from every pore. "Get out!" Victoria turned, her smile sharp as a blade. "Darling, I was just having a lovely chat with your mother about using her illness to manipulate me, about threatening to cut off her treatment if I don't perform better. Get out!" "Bondi," Victoria's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "Remember our arrangement. Remember what's at stake." "I remember exactly what's at stake. My mother's life, Bobby's company, your precious social standing, but you've overplayed your hand, Victoria. You're not the only one with power anymore." Victoria's perfect mask slipped for a moment, revealing the calculation beneath. "Are you threatening me, little girl? I'm warning you. Stay away from my mother. Stay away from my marriage, or I'll show the board exactly how you've been manipulating Brett Tech stock through insider trading." The color drained from Victoria's face. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I? I've learned a lot about corporate espionage living with Bobby. Amazing what people will tell the CEO's wife over champagne at charity galas." Mother and stepdaughter stared at each other, years of resentment crackling between them. Finally, Victoria gathered her designer dignity around her like armor. "This isn't over," she hissed. "No," Bondi agreed, "but it's changing." After Victoria's dramatic exit, Bondi turned to find her mother watching her with wide eyes. "Baby girl," Adeline said softly, "what kind of marriage did you get yourself into?" Bondi sank into the chair beside the bed, suddenly exhausted. "It's complicated, Mama." "Love usually is." Adeline reached for her daughter's hand. "But that man loves you, whether either of you realizes it yet." "Mama, you don't understand. I understand more than you think. I see the way you light up when he visits. I see how he watches you when you're not looking. Whatever brought you two together, maybe it's not as important as where you're going." Bondi's phone buzzed. A message from Bobby. "Board meeting emergency. Need you home." Her heart jumped at the word Home, even as her mind reminded her it was just part of their arrangement. When had the penthouse started feeling like home? When had Bobby's presence become something she craved rather than endured? "Go," Adeline said, reading the concern on her daughter's face. "Your husband needs you." The flight back to San Francisco gave Bondi too much time to think. Victoria's threats tumbled through her mind, tangled with memories of quiet moments with Bobby, his laugh during their chess games, the way his hands shook when he talked about his father, the gentle way he tucked her hair behind her ear for the benefit of photographers. The penthouse was dark when she arrived, but she found Bobby in the library, nursing a whiskey and staring at the chessboard. "Victoria came to the hospital," she said without preamble. His head snapped up, storm-gray eyes narrowing. "What did she do?" "Threatened to interfere with Mama's treatment if I don't make our marriage more convincing. Apparently there are rumors." "There are always rumors." He set down his glass. "What else?" "I threatened her back. Told her I knew about her insider trading." A smile tugged at his lips. "You're bluffing." "Maybe, but she doesn't know that." He stood, moving to stand before her. "You're playing a dangerous game, Bondi." "We've been playing dangerous games since the day we met." She met his gaze steadily. "I won't let her use my mother against us anymore." His breath caught at the us, and something shifted in his eyes. "No," he said softly. "We won't." They stood in charged silence, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Bobby stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "The board meeting," he said. "Harrison's making his move against the solar initiative. He's gathered support from the conservative faction." "What do you need from me?" "There's a dinner party tomorrow night. Harrison's wife, Margaret, is hosting. She's traditional. Expect certain things from a CEO's wife." Bondi understood immediately. "You need me to play the perfect corporate spouse. I need you to be you." His voice was rough. "You're the only real thing in my life anymore." The admission hung between them, too honest for their careful dance of pretense. Bondi's heart hammered against her ribs. "Bobby, I know," he cut her off. "I know what this is, what it isn't. But Victoria's right about one thing. There are expectations. The solar initiative could revolutionize clean energy access for developing nations. I can't let personal complications get in the way." Personal complications. Was that what they were calling the electricity that sparked between them during their staged kisses? The way their bodies gravitated toward each other even in private? The late-night conversations that felt more intimate than any physical touch? "We'll convince them," Bondi said firmly. "Together." He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, ignoring the way her skin tingled at his touch. They had a part to play, a performance to perfect. The fact that it was becoming harder to separate the performance from reality was a problem for another day. But as they stood in the library's soft light, their fingers intertwined, Bondi couldn't help wondering if Victoria's threats had uncovered something they'd both been trying to ignore. The possibility that their greatest danger wasn't external pressure or social expectations, but the growing feelings they'd never planned for. The chessboard sat forgotten between them, its pieces frozen in mid-game, much like their own hearts, suspended between strategy and surrender, between pretense and truth, between the safe moves they'd planned and the risky ones they longed to make. Chapter 6. Breaking Points. The Brett Tech Tower gleamed in the morning sun, its windows reflecting the perfect blue of a San Francisco spring day. But inside Bobby Brett's penthouse office, a storm was brewing. The Wall Street Journal lay open on his desk, its headlines stark and damning. Brett Tech CEO's past struggles, medical records reveal years of conversion therapy. Bondi's heels clicked against the marble floor as she rushed through the executive floor, ignoring Ms. Reynolds' attempt to stop her. She found Bobby standing at his wall of windows, his reflection fractured across the glass panels. The office looked like a war zone. Papers scattered across the floor, a shattered whiskey decanter seeping amber liquid into the carpet, his usually immaculate desk in disarray. "I came as soon as I saw the article," she said softly, closing the door behind her. He didn't turn around. "It's all there. Every treatment, every therapy session, every failed attempt to be what my father wanted." His voice was hollow. "They even found the experimental drug trials." Bondi's heart clenched, remembering their late-night conversations about his past. The desperate attempts to change his sexuality, the psychological trauma disguised as treatment, the years of self-hatred carefully hidden beneath his polished exterior. "How did they get your records?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. "Victoria." He finally turned, and the pain in his eyes made her breath catch. She must have had access through the private clinic where... He trailed off, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "The board is meeting in an hour. Harrison's calling for my resignation. They can't force you out over this." "Can't they?" He laughed bitterly. "The stock's already down 15%. Harrison's faction will argue that my instability makes me unfit to lead, that the scandal will drive away conservative investors. Then we'll fight them." Bondi moved closer, wanting to reach for him, but unsure if he would welcome her touch. "Your personal medical history has nothing to do with your ability to run this company. Don't you see? This destroys everything. The careful image we've built, the fiction of our perfect marriage, the trust I've spent years earning, it's all falling apart." His phone buzzed continuously on the desk. Board members, investors, reporters, all demanding answers. The morning news shows were already running with the story, dissecting his private pain for public consumption. "They're right," he whispered, sinking into his chair. "I'm a fraud, a broken man playing at being normal." "No." Bondi's voice cracked with emotion as she knelt beside him. "You're the strongest person I know, and I'll fight anyone who says different, starting with the board." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his eyes. "Why do you care so much? This isn't real, remember? Just a business arrangement." The words hit her like physical blows, but she stood her ground. "Do you really believe that anymore?" Before he could answer, Ms. Reynolds burst in. "Mr. Brett, the board is assembling early. They're demanding your presence immediately." Bobby straightened, his CEO mask sliding back into place, but Bondi could see the cracks in his armor. "Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes." When Ms. Reynolds left, Bondi caught his arm. "Let me come with you." "Bondi, you're not facing this alone." The boardroom was thick with tension when they arrived. Harrison sat at the head of the table, his satisfaction poorly concealed beneath a mask of concern. Victoria lurked in a corner, perfectly styled as always, watching the drama unfold with calculating eyes. "Robert," Harrison began, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "In light of today's revelations, we feel it's best for the company if you step down temporarily while we assess the situation." "You mean while you stage your coup?" Bondi cut in, ignoring Bobby's warning glance. Harrison's smile turned cold. "Mrs. Brett, this is a board matter. Your presence isn't required." "Actually, it is." Bondi straightened to her full height, channeling every lesson in corporate warfare she'd learned from watching Bobby. "As the CEO's wife and a significant shareholder, I have every right to be here." "A touching display of loyalty," Victoria purred from her corner, "but perhaps misplaced, given the circumstances." Bondi turned to address the full board. "You want to judge him? Look at what he's built. Look at the lives he's changed. His sexuality doesn't define his worth, and shame on anyone who thinks otherwise." The boardroom erupted in chaos. Conservative members shouted about moral standards and company image. while others argued about stock prices and investor confidence. Through it all, Bobby sat silent, his face a mask of careful control. Finally, he stood, commanding attention without raising his voice. My personal life, my medical history, these are private matters that have no bearing on my ability to lead this company. Under my leadership, BrettTech has become an industry leader in clean energy technology. Our solar initiative could bring power to millions in developing nations. If you want to fire me for being gay, for struggling with society's prejudices, then do it. But be honest about your reasons. Harrison's face turned purple. This isn't about your preferences. This is about trust, about stability. No, Bondi interjected. This is about fear. Fear of difference, fear of change, fear of anything that doesn't fit into your narrow view of normal. She moved to stand beside Bobby, taking his hand openly. The gesture wasn't for show this time. It was a declaration of allegiance, of belief, of something deeper than their arranged marriage had ever meant to be. The press is waiting for a statement, Ms. Reynolds announced from the doorway. Harrison smiled triumphantly. We'll announce your temporary leave of absence. We'll do no such thing, Bondi interrupted. My husband will announce that BrettTech stands for innovation, for progress, for the future. That includes supporting all people, regardless of their orientation or struggles. And if any investors have a problem with that, they're welcome to take their money elsewhere. The boardroom fell silent. Bobby's hand tightened around hers. You're bluffing, Harrison said finally. The stock won't survive that kind of statement. Try me. Bobby's voice was steel. I'd rather lose my position fighting for what's right than keep it by hiding who I am. Victoria pushed away from her corner. This is touching, really. But let's be practical. The scandal, the only scandal here, is your betrayal. Bondi turned on her stepmother. Leaking confidential medical records? That's not just immoral, it's illegal. I wonder what the board would think about having a blackmailer among their shareholders. Victoria's perfect composure cracked. You can't prove anything. Can't I? Bondi smiled. Amazing what people confess after a few drinks at charity galas, especially bitter ex-employees who helped obtain those records. The tide in the room began to turn. Board members whispered among themselves, calculating new odds, sensing the shift in power. Harrison's triumph faded as he realized his coup was unraveling. Perhaps, a senior board member suggested, we should focus on damage control rather than leadership changes. Show unity in the face of this unauthorized disclosure of private information. The discussion turned technical. Press statements, stock stabilization measures, legal action against the leak's source. Through it all, Bobby and Bondi remained standing together, their clasped hands a silent declaration. Hours later, they returned to the penthouse, emotionally exhausted but undefeated. The press had run with a different story than Harrison had hoped. Not a scandal about a CEO's sexuality, but a powerful narrative about perseverance, acceptance, and corporate responsibility. Bondi found Bobby in his home office, surrounded by the evening papers. Their joint statement had made every front page. BrettTech CEO stands proud. Innovation knows no boundaries. Thank you, he said quietly as she entered, for standing with me, for fighting for me. Always. The word slipped out before she could stop it, heavy with meaning neither of them was ready to face. He looked up at her, his storm grey eyes vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. I don't know how to do this. Do what? Feel this way, about you, about us, everything I thought I knew about myself. Bondi's heart thundered in her chest. Maybe we don't need to know. Maybe we just need to be brave enough to find out. The space between them crackled with possibility. Outside, the city lights began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, witnesses to a moment of truth between two people who had started with lies. I'm tired of pretending, Bobby whispered. Then don't. Bondi took a step closer. Be real with me. Be yourself. The kiss, when it came, wasn't for show. It wasn't calculated or performed. It was real, messy and uncertain and full of questions neither of them had answers to. But it was honest, and after a day of fighting for truth, that felt like the most important thing in the world. Chapter 7. The Revolution. The morning of the emergency board meeting dawned gray and misty, the San Francisco fog wrapping the Brettech Tower in a shroud that matched the gravity of the day ahead. Bondi stood in her closet, carefully selecting her armor. A black Alexander McQueen suit that made her look both powerful and elegant. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened her mother's pearl necklace, a reminder of why she'd entered this arrangement in the first place. "Are you sure about this?" Bobby asked from the doorway. He looked exhausted, the past week of media scrutiny and board pressure evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. "Victoria has to be stopped," Bondi replied, meeting his gaze in the mirror. "She's never going to leave us alone otherwise." United States. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning after their kiss in his office. They hadn't talked about it, hadn't had time, with the chaos that followed the medical records leak. But something had shifted, the careful boundaries of their arrangement blurring into something neither of them had expected. "The board won't take kindly to accusations against one of their own," he warned, "especially not from the CEO's fake wife." Her smile was sharp. "That's exactly why it has to be me. They won't see me coming." Ms. Reynolds met them in the lobby, tablet in hand, and concern evident in her usually stoic expression. "The financial press is already gathering. Harrison's people have been hinting at a major announcement." "Let them hint," Bondi said firmly. "They're not the only ones with surprises today." The boardroom was packed when they arrived, not just board members, but major shareholders and executive staff. Victoria sat in her usual corner, perfectly composed in Chanel, a hint of triumph in her sharp smile. Harrison occupied the head of the table, practically radiating satisfaction. "Robert," he began as Bobby took his seat, "in light of recent events and the continuing instability of our stock price, we've called this meeting to discuss the future leadership of Brettech." "You mean your attempted coup?" Bondi stepped forward, her heels silent on the thick carpet, but her presence commanding attention. Harrison's smile turned condescending. "Mrs. Brett, while we appreciate your concern, this is a confidential board matter." "Actually," Bondi removed a stack of documents from her briefcase, "this is now a criminal matter." The room went silent. Victoria's perfect posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. "I have here documented evidence of insider trading, corporate espionage, and illegal access to confidential medical records." Bondi began distributing copies to each board member, all traced back to one source. "This is absurd," Victoria cut in, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. "You can't possibly—" "Oh, but I can." Bondi pulled up a presentation on the room's main screen. "Let's start with the irregular stock trades made through shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Interesting how they all corresponded with leaked information about Brettech's private dealings. Charts and graphs appeared, showing patterns that made several board members lean forward with sharp interest. Then there's the matter of accessing private medical records through bribed employees at multiple facilities. That's not just unethical, it's federal crime territory." Victoria stood, her composure cracking. "These are baseless accusations." "Are they?" Bondi pulled up emails, bank transfers, phone records. "Your mistake was thinking I was just a trophy wife, that I wouldn't understand the corporate game. But I've been watching, learning, gathering evidence. Every charity gala, every social event, every seemingly innocent conversation. People talk, Victoria, especially to someone they underestimate." Harrison tried to regain control. "This is all circumstantial. The SEC doesn't think so." Bondi played her trump card. They've already opened an investigation. In fact, they should be serving warrants right about now. As if on cue, Ms. Reynolds entered. There are federal agents in the lobby, sir. They're requesting access to certain financial records and Mrs. Blackwood's office. The boardroom erupted in chaos. Victoria made a move toward the door, but found her path blocked by security. Harrison's face turned an alarming shade of red as he realized his power play was imploding. You've been manipulating this company's stock for years, Bondi continued, her voice carrying over the commotion. Using insider information to profit from every crisis, every announcement. The medical records leak was just your latest attempt to drive down the price so you could buy more shares cheaply through your shell companies. You little bitch, Victoria snarled, her mask finally shattering completely. You have no idea what you're dealing with. No, Victoria, you have no idea who you're dealing with. Bondi turned to address the full board. For years, you've all been played. While you were focused on Bobby's sexuality, on maintaining some outdated image of corporate respectability, she was stealing from you, using you, making millions from your prejudices and fears. The evidence was irrefutable. Bank records showed the pattern of profit from leaked information. Email trails revealed the careful orchestration of crises designed to manipulate stock prices. Phone records connected Victoria to every major leak and scandal that had plagued Brett Tech over the past 5 years. Mrs. Brett, a senior board member, spoke up. How did you obtain all this information? I had help. Bondi nodded to Ms. Reynolds, who had been quietly gathering evidence for months. And I had motivation. You all thought I married Bobby for his money, for status. The truth is, I married him because I believed in him, in his vision for this company, in the difference Brett Tech could make in the world. She moved to stand beside Bobby, drawing strength from his presence. You want to judge him? Look at what he's built. Look at the lives he's changing. His sexuality doesn't define his worth, and shame on anyone who thinks otherwise. The boardroom fell silent as her words sank in. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. Harrison seemed to shrink in his chair as other board members turned calculating eyes toward him. The SEC will want to interview everyone, Bondi continued. They'll find more, I'm sure, years of manipulation and fraud. But right now, you have a choice to make. You can continue down this path of prejudice and fear, letting people like Victoria manipulate you for profit. Or you can embrace change, support innovation, stand behind a CEO who's never been afraid to fight for what's right. One by one, board members began to nod. The tide was turning, power shifting like sand beneath their feet. Victoria was escorted out by security, her threats falling on deaf ears. Harrison resigned on the spot, trying to distance himself from the growing scandal. Through it all, Bobby sat quietly, watching Bondi with something like awe in his eyes. When the room finally cleared, leaving them alone with the aftermath of her revolution, he stood and faced her. You did all this for me? For us, she corrected softly. For what we could be if we stopped pretending. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, feeling the tremors in his fingers. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep fighting. Say you'll be who you really are, without shame or fear. And you? His voice was rough with emotion. Who are you really, Bondi Brett? She smiled, squeezing his hand. I'm the woman who just brought down a corporate conspiracy for the man she wasn't supposed to fall in love with. The word hung between them, honest and terrifying and real. Outside the boardroom windows, the fog was finally lifting, revealing a clear blue sky, a new day, a new beginning, a new truth neither of them had seen coming. The press will want statements, Ms. Reynolds said from the doorway, tactfully avoiding their intimate moment. Let them wait, Bobby replied, not taking his eyes off Bondi. We have more important things to discuss. The revolution was complete. Victoria's reign of manipulation was over, but the real victory wasn't in the corporate takedown or the exposed conspiracy. It was in the way Bobby looked at her now, with trust, with gratitude, with something that looked remarkably like love. They had started with a business arrangement, a carefully constructed lie. But standing in the aftermath of truth, they found something neither had expected: the courage to be real, to be vulnerable, to be themselves. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of possibility. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as CEO and trophy wife, not as convenient allies, but as partners who had found strength in each other's truth. Chapter 8. Unexpected turns. The aftermath of Victoria's arrest transformed the penthouse into command central for damage control. Lawyers, PR specialists, and federal investigators cycled through daily, turning their carefully maintained sanctuary into a battlefield of legal documents and press statements. But late at night, when the experts finally left and the phones stopped ringing, Bondi and Bobby found moments of peace in their shared spaces. 3 weeks after the board meeting showdown, they sat in their usual spots in the library, a chess game abandoned between them. The city lights twinkled beyond the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy around them. The SEC confirmed the extent of her manipulation, Bobby said, swirling whiskey in his crystal glass. 5 years of orchestrated leaks, strategic scandals, all timed perfectly to influence stock prices. She made millions while nearly destroying everything we built. Nearly, Bondi emphasized. She sat curled in her favorite leather chair, her heels discarded, looking softer than the corporate warrior who had taken down Victoria. But she failed. BrettTech is stronger now, more transparent, more authentic. His eyes met hers across the chessboard. Because of you. Because of us, she corrected. I just exposed the truth. You're the one brave enough to live it. The press had been surprisingly supportive after Bobby's official statement about his sexuality. His honesty, combined with Victoria's arrest, had transformed the narrative from scandal to triumph. BrettTech's stock had not only recovered, but reached new highs as investors responded to the company's commitment to integrity and innovation. I received another letter today, Bobby said quietly, from a young engineer in our R&D department. He's been hiding his relationship with another man, afraid it would hurt his career. After my statement, he finally felt safe enough to come out. Bondi watched emotions play across his face. Pride, pain, hope, fear. You're changing lives just by being yourself. Am I? He set down his glass, running a hand through his hair in a gesture she'd come to recognize as uncertainty. I'm not sure I even know who that is anymore. What do you mean? He stood, moving to the windows with restless energy. All my life I've defined myself by what I'm not. Not straight enough for my father, not gay enough for the community, not cold enough for business, not warm enough for real connections. But lately, you make me feel like I could be enough, just as I am. The admission seemed to cost him, his shoulders tense as he stared out at the city. Bondi's heart thundered in her chest. Since their kiss in his office, they'd been dancing around the change in their relationship, both afraid to examine it too closely. You've always been enough, she said softly. The world just didn't deserve your truth. He turned to face her, his storm gray eyes intense. And you? Do you deserve my truth? I want to. The simple honesty of her response seemed to break something open between them. Bobby moved back to his chair, closer this time, his knee brushing hers. When Victoria arranged this marriage, he began carefully, I thought it would be simple. A business arrangement, a necessary compromise. I never expected to feel something real, to feel everything. His voice was rough with emotion. You challenge me, support me, see me in ways no one else ever has. You make me question everything I thought I knew about myself." Bondi reached for his hand, remembering all the times they'd held hands for show, for cameras, for appearances. This touch was different, private, real, terrifying in its honesty. "I don't know what this is," he confessed, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I've never felt this way about a woman before. It terrifies me." "Then let's be terrified together," she replied. "No labels, no expectations, just us." His free hand came up to cup her cheek, and she leaned into the touch, closing her eyes against the intensity of the moment. "My mother called from Switzerland yesterday," she murmured. "She asked me if I was happy." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that I married you for her sake but stayed for my own." A shaky breath escaped him. "Bondi, I know it's complicated. I know you're still figuring things out, but whatever this is between us, it's real, more real than any performance we've put on." He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers. "I don't want to hurt you. You couldn't. Not by being honest, not by being yourself." The kiss, when it came, was nothing like their staged moments for the cameras. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement. But as Bondi's hand slid into his hair, as his arms pulled her closer, the kiss deepened into something hungry and honest and real. They broke apart, breathless, but stayed close, sharing the same air. "I need you to understand something," Bobby said, his voice unsteady. "This doesn't change who I am. My sexuality, my struggles with it, that's all still part of me. I would never ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are." She traced his jaw with gentle fingers. "Labels don't matter to me. What matters is how we feel, here and now." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "And how do you feel?" "Like I'm finally waking up to something I've been trying not to feel since the day we met." A ghost of his old smirk touched his lips. "Even when you thought I was just a ruthless CEO using you for his image. Especially then. Because even at your most guarded, your most controlled, I saw glimpses of the real you. The man who plays chess at midnight, who fights for clean energy in developing nations, who looks at art like it holds secrets he's dying to understand." "You see me," he whispered, wonder in his voice. "I see you, all of you, and I'm not afraid of any of it." He pulled her into another kiss, this one fierce with gratitude and need, and something that felt dangerously like love. Later, as they lay tangled together on the library's leather sofa, Bondi traced patterns on his chest while he played with her hair. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now?" He smiled down at her. "Now we figure out who we are together. No scripts, no expectations, no Victoria pulling strings. The board can deal with it. I'm done letting other people's prejudices control my life." He tightened his arms around her. "Besides, you're rather terrifying in a board meeting. I don't think they'll dare object." She laughed, snuggling closer. "I learned from the best. You learned better than the best." His voice turned serious. "You taught me how to be brave, Bondi, how to fight for what matters. And what matters to you? This, United States, whatever we're becoming." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "I may not have all the answers about who I am or what I want, but I know I want to figure it out with you." The city continued to sparkle beyond the windows, but neither of them noticed. They were too caught up in their own private revolution, one that had nothing to do with corporate takeovers or social expectations, and everything to do with the courage to love without labels, to be real without restrictions, to trust in the unexpected turns that life sometimes takes. As they drifted to sleep in each other's arms, the chessboard sat forgotten on the table, its pieces arranged in a game they'd never finish. But maybe that was fitting. Some games weren't meant to be won or lost, but simply played, move by move, discovery by discovery, truth by truth. Chapter 9. The Truth About Love. Spring had transformed San Francisco into a canvas of color, with wildflowers blooming in Golden Gate Park and cherry blossoms dotting the streets. Bondi stood on the penthouse balcony, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and pink. Behind her, she could hear Bobby on the phone with her mother's doctors in Switzerland, his voice warm with genuine concern as he discussed her latest test results. The past month had changed everything between them. What started as careful exploration of their feelings had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a connection that defied labels and challenged everything they thought they knew about love. "Your mother's numbers are improving," Bobby said, joining her on the balcony. "The doctors are optimistic about reducing her treatment schedule." Bondi leaned back against him as his arms wrapped around her waist. These casual intimacies still surprised them both. How natural it felt to seek each other's touch, to exist in each other's space. "Thank you," she murmured, "for everything you've done for her, for me." "You never have to thank me for that." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Your mother is family now, and you..." He trailed off, still sometimes struggling to put his feelings into words. "And me," she prompted gently. "You're everything I never knew I needed." Their first real kiss had happened naturally, unexpectedly, during a quiet evening at home. Neither had planned it, neither had fought it. It was as simple as breathing. Bondi laughing at something he'd said, Bobby looking at her like she was a miracle he couldn't quite believe in. And then they were kissing, soft and sweet and real. Afterward, they'd talked for hours about identity, about sexuality, about the complexities of love that didn't fit into neat categories. "Maybe I'm not what I thought I was," he'd confessed, tracing patterns on her palm. "Maybe none of us are. Maybe love doesn't fit in boxes," she'd suggested. "Maybe it's as fluid as art." Now, watching the sunset together, Bondi felt the truth of those words deep in her soul. Their love story wasn't traditional, wasn't simple, wasn't what either of them had expected, but it was theirs, and it was real. "The press is starting to notice," Bobby said, his chin resting on her shoulder. "The way we look at each other. It's different now, more genuine." "Are you worried?" "About the press?" "No." His arms tightened around her. "About hurting you every day." Bondi turned in his embrace to face him. "Why would you hurt me?" "Because this is all new to me. These feelings, this way of loving. I'm still figuring it out. What if I can't be everything you need?" "I don't need you to be everything," she said softly. "I just need you to be you, exactly as you are." His storm-gray eyes searched her face. "How did you get so wise?" "I fell in love with a complicated man who taught me that love isn't about fitting into someone else's expectations. It's about being brave enough to follow your heart, even when it leads you somewhere unexpected." The words hung between them. Love spoken plainly for the first time. Bobby's breath caught, his hands trembling slightly where they rested on her waist. "Say it again," he whispered. "I love you." She cupped his face in her hands. "Not because of who you're supposed to be, but because of who you are, all of you. Every complex, beautiful part." He kissed her then, pouring all the emotions he struggled to voice into the press of his lips against hers. When they parted, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I love you too," he said roughly, "in ways I never thought possible. You make me feel whole, like every part of me is valid and valuable, even the parts I've spent years trying to change or hide." Inside the penthouse, Bondi's phone chimed with messages, probably Ms. Reynolds with updates about tomorrow's board meeting or the latest press inquiries. But for now, the world beyond their balcony could wait. "Dance with me," Bondi Bondi said impulsively. Bobby raised an eyebrow. Here? Now? Why not? We've done enough performing for others. This dance is just for us. He smiled, that real, unguarded smile that still made her heart skip, and pulled her close. They swayed together as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky, no music needed except the rhythm of their hearts. I used to watch you, he confessed quietly, in the early days of our arrangement. The way you moved through rooms full of powerful people like you belonged there. The way you saw beauty in everything. The way you never judged me, even when you had every right to. I was watching you too, she admitted. Learning your tells, your masks, your moments of genuine joy, falling in love with you piece by piece, even when I tried not to. His hand traced the curve of her spine. When did you know that this was real? There wasn't one moment, it was all of them. The midnight chess games, the way you supported my career without trying to control it. The gentle way you'd touch me, even when no one was watching. Every little truth we shared, every barrier we broke down. For me, it was the day you defended me to the board, he said. Not because you had to, not for show, but because you believed in me. No one had ever fought for me like that. The sun had fully set now, the city lights twinkling to life around them. In the distance, fog was rolling in, a familiar sight that once represented their clouded beginnings but now felt like a comfortable blanket wrapping around their private world. Whatever happens next, Bondi said, we face it together. No more pretending, no more hiding. No more masks, he agreed. Just us, figuring it out day by day. They stayed on the balcony until the fog enveloped them completely, holding each other, sharing soft kisses and quiet truths. Their love story had begun as a business arrangement, evolved through friendship and understanding, and blossomed into something that defied easy definition. But maybe that was the point. Love, real love, didn't need labels or categories. It needed only acceptance, courage, and the willingness to let your heart lead you to unexpected places. Later that night, as they lay tangled together in sheets that still felt new and thrilling, Bobby traced the curve of Bondi's cheek with gentle fingers. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For showing me that love isn't about changing who you are. It's about finding someone who helps you become more fully yourself. Bondi kissed him softly, pouring all her understanding and acceptance into the gesture. They had faced scandal, prejudice, and their own fears to reach this point. But here, in the quiet darkness of their shared bedroom, none of that mattered. What mattered was the truth they'd discovered together, that love transcends boundaries, defies expectations, and sometimes appears in the most unexpected packages. Their story wasn't traditional, wasn't simple, wasn't what either of them had planned, but it was real. It was theirs, and it was beautiful in all its complexity. The fog continued to roll in outside their windows, but inside, everything was crystal clear. They had found their truth in each other's arms, in the space between performance and reality, in the courage to love without limits or labels. And that truth was more powerful than any fiction they could have created. Chapter 10. The storm breaks. Victoria's revenge came swift and brutal, like a perfectly manicured hand wielding a poisoned blade. The morning headlines screamed across every major news outlet, BrettTech CEO's marriage exposed inside the contract that fooled Silicon Valley. Bondi stared at her phone, reading the leaked email exchanges between Victoria and the private clinic where her mother was receiving treatment. The careful negotiation of terms, the cold discussion of price tags and timelines, the clinical dissection of their arranged marriage, all laid bare for the world to see. Don't read any more, Bobby said, trying to take the phone from her hands. They were in his office at BrettTech, where Ms. Reynolds had rushed them as soon as the story broke. They're calling me a gold digger, Bondi said numbly, saying I manipulated a vulnerable gay man for money and status. We'll fight this, he promised, kneeling before her chair. Victoria's credibility is already destroyed. We can... It's not just Victoria. Bondi looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. The LGBTQ+ community feels betrayed. They're saying you've been converted, that our relationship perpetuates harmful stereotypes. Your own community thinks I've somehow changed you, forced you to be something you're not. The accusations hurt more than she'd expected. After everything they'd been through, after all the careful ways they'd navigated their unexpected feelings, to have their love reduced to tabloid speculation and angry tweets felt like a physical blow. Ms. Reynolds entered with a stack of preliminary press reports. The major networks are all running with the story. Victoria's given exclusive interviews to 3 different outlets, painting herself as a whistleblower exposing corporate fraud. Fraud? Bondi stood, anger finally breaking through her shock. She's the one who orchestrated this whole thing. Which makes her the perfect source, Bobby said grimly. She knows every detail, every meeting, every document. She can twist the truth because she helped create it. The phone lines were lighting up like Christmas trees. Reporters, board members, LGBTQ+ organizations, all demanding statements. Social media was exploding with hashtags. #Brett Tech scandal, #fake marriage, #conversion controversy. We need to get ahead of this, Ms. Reynolds advised. The board is calling an emergency meeting in an hour. They'll want... No! Bobby's voice was steel. No more meetings, no more careful statements, no more playing by their rules. He turned to Bondi, taking her hands in his. I'm done hiding. Bobby, I love you, he said firmly. Not because of some arrangement, not because you converted me, but because you showed me that love isn't about gender or sexuality or fitting into neat categories. It's about finding someone who sees you, all of you, and loves you anyway. Bondi squeezed his hands. The press will tear us apart. Let them try. He smiled, that real, unguarded smile that still made her heart skip. We've faced worse. The next hour was a whirlwind of activity. Ms. Reynolds coordinated with their PR team while Bobby and Bondi prepared for what would either be the end of their careers or the beginning of something revolutionary. The press had gathered outside Brett Tech's headquarters like vultures sensing a kill. Camera flashes exploded as Bobby and Bondi emerged hand in hand to face the crowd. Mr. Brett, is it true your marriage was arranged? Mrs. Brett, how much were you paid? What about the gay community's response? Bobby stepped to the microphones, his grip on Bondi's hand tight but steady. Yes, he began, his voice clear and strong. Our marriage began as an arrangement, a business deal orchestrated by Victoria Blackwood for her own financial gain. But what she never counted on, what none of us expected, was that we would fall in love. The reporters erupted with questions, but Bobby continued. I am not straight. I'm not trying to be. I'm simply in love with an extraordinary person who sees me for who I am. Love isn't about gender. It's about souls connecting. Bondi stepped forward, her voice joining his. We didn't choose to fall in love. It happened slowly, naturally, as we discovered who we really were beneath the masks society forced us to wear. But the gay community, one reporter started, is diverse and complex, Bobby cut in. Sexuality isn't binary. Love isn't simple. I spent years trying to fit myself into other people's boxes, trying to be what everyone else wanted. Bondi was the first person who told me I was enough exactly as I am. Their honesty seemed to catch the press off guard. The usual aggressive questions gave way to more thoughtful inquiries about identity, about the nature of love, about breaking free from societal expectations. What about Victoria Blackwood's claims? Someone asked. Victoria manipulated us both, Bondi answered. She used my mother's illness and Bobby's struggles with acceptance to orchestrate what she thought would be the perfect corporate marriage, What she didn't count on was that forcing us together would lead us to find something real. As if on cue, Victoria herself appeared at the edge of the crowd, designer sunglasses failing to hide her fury. "How dare you twist this?" she snarled. "Everyone knows what this is. A desperate gay man and an opportunistic gold digger playing house for publicity." The crowd parted as she stalked forward, cameras swiveling to capture the confrontation. "You're right about one thing, Victoria," Bobby said calmly. "We were desperate. I was desperate to protect my company from prejudice, and Bondi was desperate to save her mother's life. You used that desperation for your own profit, but love has a way of changing everything." Love. Victoria laughed bitterly. "You don't even know what you are anymore. The board will never accept this farce." "The board doesn't have to accept anything," Bondi stepped forward. "They just have to look at BrettTech's performance under Bobby's leadership, at the lives being changed by our clean energy initiatives, at the inclusive workplace we've created." Supporters began emerging from the crowd. BrettTech employees, members of the LGBTQ+ community, people touched by their story of love transcending boundaries. "You can't possibly believe this is real," Victoria tried one last time, her perfect facade cracking. "What I believe," Bobby addressed the cameras directly, "is that love doesn't fit in boxes. It doesn't follow rules or respect boundaries. Sometimes it appears in the most unexpected packages and teaches us that everything we thought we knew about ourselves was too small, too limited." He turned to Bondi, his eyes full of emotion. "I love this woman, not because she changed me, but because she showed me I never needed changing, because she fights for what she believes in, supports what matters, and loves with her whole heart." Bondi's eyes welled with tears as she faced the cameras. "And I love this man, all of him. Every complex, beautiful part. Our story may have started as a business arrangement, but it grew into something real, something true, something worth fighting for." Their words seemed to resonate with the crowd. The aggressive energy shifted to something more contemplative. Even some of the reporters looked moved. Victoria stormed off, her revenge plot unraveling in the face of their honest emotion. But they barely noticed. Too caught up in the truth, they were finally free to share. Social media exploded again, but this time with a different tone. "Love is Love" began trending alongside their story. Messages poured in from people sharing their own complex journeys with sexuality and identity. The LGBTQ+ community, initially hostile, began engaging in thoughtful discussions about the spectrum of sexuality, about breaking free from labels, about the courage to love authentically. Later that evening, as they sat in their penthouse sanctuary, Bondi and Bobby watched the coverage of their statement play across news channels. "Do you think they understand?" Bondi asked softly. "How real this is?" Bobby pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Some will, some won't. What matters is that we know the truth." And what is the truth? That love is bigger than labels, that hearts don't follow rules, that sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the most unexpected beginnings. Outside their windows, the city lights twinkled like stars, witnesses to their revolution of love. They had faced down prejudice, scandal, and society's narrow definitions. They had emerged stronger, truer, more authentically themselves. Their love story wasn't traditional. It didn't fit in neat categories or follow expected paths. But maybe that was exactly what made it powerful. Its ability to challenge assumptions, break boundaries, and show that love, real love, knows no limits. Victoria's revenge had failed, not because they fought back with perfect PR strategies or careful statements, but because they chose to be honest. They chose to stand in their truth, complex and messy as it was, and trust that genuine love would resonate more deeply than any scandal. Chapter 11. Rising from Ashes. The truth resonated more powerfully than any lie Victoria could have crafted. In the weeks following their public revelation, something extraordinary began to happen. People came forward with similar stories of love beyond labels, of connections that defied traditional categories, of hearts that chose their own paths, regardless of society's expectations. Bondi sat in her office at the gallery, surrounded by letters and emails from around the world. A transgender artist who found love with someone who saw past gender, a bisexual woman who married her best friend after years of questioning her sexuality, a gay man who discovered his heart had room for unexpected love without invalidating his identity. These stories, she said to Bobby that evening, curled against him on their balcony. They're all so different, yet they share the same truth. Love doesn't fit in boxes. Bobby wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on her shoulder as they watched the sunset paint the bay in brilliant colors. We gave them permission to be honest, to stop forcing themselves into categories that were too small for their hearts. The impact rippled through Silicon Valley and beyond. BrettTech's board, far from rejecting their truth, recognized the power of authentic leadership. The company launched a foundation supporting LGBTQ+ youth, with Bondi as its artistic director. Her first initiative was a gallery showcase featuring artists exploring themes of identity, love, and transformation. "Tell me about this one," Bobby said, studying a particularly striking piece at the exhibition's opening night. The canvas exploded with color and motion, figures emerging from and merging with abstract forms. "The artist calls it fluid love," Bondi explained, sliding her hand into his. "It's about the way love transforms us, breaks down our preconceptions, teaches us new ways of being." Around them, the gallery buzzed with energy. Tech leaders mingled with artists, activists chatted with executives, all drawn together by the power of honest storytelling. Even some former critics had come, moved by the authenticity of their journey. Victoria watched from prison as her schemes crumbled. The media that had once eagerly amplified her accusations now celebrated the positive change she'd inadvertently sparked. Her attempt to destroy them had instead catalyzed a movement of acceptance and understanding. Late that night, after the guests had gone and the gallery grew quiet, Bobby found Bondi standing before Fluid Love. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "About how far we've come, how much has changed." She turned to face him. "A year ago, we were strangers entering a business arrangement. Now, ... Now we're revolutionaries," he finished with a smile, pulling her close. "Leading a revolution of love." The following weeks brought more changes. BrettTech's Clean Energy Initiative expanded, bringing sustainable power to communities in need. Bondi's mother recovered enough to return home, moving into a sunny apartment near the gallery. And their story continued to inspire others to embrace their authentic selves. One morning, Ms. Reynolds brought them a special delivery, a letter from a young BrettTech employee. "Dear Mr. Brett and Mrs. Brett," Bondi read aloud, her voice thick with emotion. "Your courage in sharing your story gave me the strength to come out to my traditional family, to tell them that love isn't about meeting their expectations, but about being true to my heart. They're trying to understand, and that's a start. Thank you for showing us that love is love, in all its beautiful, complicated forms." Bobby's eyes glistened as he listened. "We're making a difference." "You always made a difference," Bondi reminded him. "Now you're just doing it as your full, authentic self." The foundation grew rapidly, providing support and resources for LGBTQ+ youth struggling with identity and acceptance. Bondi curated exhibitions that traveled the country, sparking conversations about love, identity, and the courage to be oneself. At a foundation event, a young artist approached them. "Your story helped me accept my own journey," she said. "I used to think I had to choose, gay or straight, this or that. Now I know it's okay to be exactly who I am, to love exactly who I love. Bobby squeezed Bondi's hand. We're still figuring it out ourselves, he admitted. Every day brings new discoveries. That's what makes it beautiful, the artist replied. You're showing us that it's okay not to have all the answers, as long as we're honest about the questions. Late one night, in their penthouse sanctuary, Bondi found Bobby in the library, looking at old photos from their arranged marriage days. Look how careful we were, he mused. Every touch calculated, every smile measured. And now? She settled beside him, studying their past selves. Now everything is real. Sometimes messy, sometimes complicated, but always true. He set down the photos. I never thought I could have this, a love that accepts all of me, that doesn't try to force me into being something I'm not. You taught me that too, Bondi said softly. That love isn't about changing someone, it's about creating space for them to be exactly who they are. Their kiss was gentle, full of understanding and acceptance. Outside, the city hummed with life, while inside their sanctuary, they held each other, grateful for the unexpected path that had led them here. The Foundation's first anniversary gala was a celebration of transformation. Artists, activists, and allies gathered to honor the stories of love that had emerged in the wake of their revelation. A year ago, Bobby addressed the crowd. I thought I knew who I was, what I could be, who I could love. I had accepted the limits society placed on my heart. Then I met someone who showed me that love doesn't follow rules. It follows truth. Bondi joined him at the podium, their hands naturally finding each other. We started with a lie, she continued, a business arrangement meant to satisfy others' expectations. But in that space between pretense and truth, we found something real, something that taught us both that love is bigger than labels, stronger than prejudice, more beautiful than any box we try to put it in. The applause was thunderous, but they barely heard it, too caught up in each other's eyes, in the truth they'd discovered together. Later that night, as they danced under the stars on their balcony, Bondi rested her head on Bobby's chest. Do you ever regret it, going public with our story? Never, he said firmly. Every letter we receive, every person who finds courage in our truth, every life changed, it all matters more than any scandal or criticism. We're changing the world, she murmured. No, he corrected gently. We're just showing it what's possible when love leads the way. The Foundation continued to grow, touching lives across the globe. Victoria watched from prison as her schemes turned to ash, while something beautiful rose in their place. Bondi's mother bloomed in her recovery, supported by a love that had started as sacrifice, but transformed into triumph. And in their private moments, Bondi and Bobby continued to discover new depths to their connection, new ways of loving, new truths about themselves. Their story became not just about breaking free from labels, but about the courage to love authentically, to live truthfully, to be fully and unapologetically oneself. The revolution they'd started wasn't just about sexuality or identity, it was about the power of genuine love to transform, heal, and illuminate the path to truth. In the end, they hadn't just risen from the ashes of Victoria's revenge, they'd helped others rise too, creating a world where love knew no boundaries and hearts were free to choose their own way home. Chapter 12. Beyond Definitions. Their second wedding was everything their first wasn't: intimate, authentic, born of pure love rather than business arrangements. They chose the Japanese tea garden in Golden Gate Park, where cherry blossoms floated on gentle breezes and koi fish painted bright streaks beneath crystal-clear waters. Unlike their first ceremony at Grace Cathedral, there were no society photographers, no business obligations, no Victoria orchestrating every detail. Instead, they surrounded themselves with only those who had supported their journey. Bondi's recovered mother beaming with pride, the Brett Tech employees who had found courage in their story, the artists and activists who had become family along the way. Bondi wore a flowing dress in soft ivory silk, designed by a transgender artist from their foundation. Instead of the rigid perfection of her first wedding gown, this one moved like water, catching light and shadow as she walked through the garden's winding paths. Her dark skin glowed with happiness rather than expensive products, and her natural curls were crowned with delicate cherry blossoms. Bobby waited for her beside the moon bridge, looking more relaxed and genuine than he ever had in his CEO suits. His grey eyes shimmered with emotion as she approached, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached for hers. A year ago, he began his vows, his voice carrying clearly in the intimate garden setting. I thought I knew all the ways a heart could love. I had drawn careful lines around my identity, built walls around my feelings, accepted the limits society placed on who and how I could love. He squeezed her hands, his storm grey eyes never leaving hers. Then you came into my life, and every boundary I'd created began to blur. You never tried to change me, never asked me to be anything other than exactly who I am. You just loved me, completely and without reservation, until I learned to love myself the same way. Tears slipped down Bondi's cheeks as she began her own vows. You showed me that love isn't about fitting into someone else's story. It's about having the courage to write your own. When we first met, I thought I was entering a business arrangement, sacrificing my chance at real love to save my mother's life. Instead, I found a love so true, so transformative, that it changed not just our lives, but the lives of others who needed to see that love knows no boundaries. The afternoon sun painted everything in gold as they exchanged rings. Not the ostentatious diamonds of their first wedding, but simple bands engraved with their private promise, love beyond definitions. You never tried to change me, Bobby said in his vows. You just loved me into being more myself. Bondi smiled through tears. And you showed me that sometimes the heart knows better than the mind what we truly need. That love doesn't follow rules or respect categories. It simply is, in all its beautiful complexity. When they kissed, it wasn't the careful, staged kiss of their first wedding. This was real, deep and full of promise. A kiss between two people who had found their truth in each other's arms. The celebration afterward was held in the gallery where their foundation had begun, surrounded by art that told stories of transformation and authentic love. They danced their first dance to a song written specifically for them by a young musician they'd helped through the foundation, its lyrics speaking of love that transcends definitions. Later, as evening painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, they slipped away to their balcony, the place where so many of their honest moments had unfolded. Do you remember our first night here? Bondi asked, leaning back against his chest as they watched the sunset. How careful we were to maintain our distance, to keep our walls up. Bobby's arms tightened around her waist. And now look at us, breaking down walls, changing perceptions, showing the world that love is too vast to be contained by simple definitions. Are you happy? She turned in his embrace to face him. Truly happy? His smile was answer enough, but he spoke anyway. I'm more than happy. I'm complete. You didn't just accept who I am. You helped me discover parts of myself I never knew existed. You showed me that sexuality isn't binary, that love isn't limited, that hearts can surprise us in the most beautiful ways. And you, she traced his jaw with gentle fingers, showed me that sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones that break all the rules. Their kiss deepened as the last rays of sunlight painted them in gold. Below, the city began to light up. a testament to how far they'd come from those first careful days of their arranged marriage. Inside, they could hear the celebration continuing, laughter, music, joy. But here in their private moment, they held each other and marveled at the journey that had brought them here. "We started with a lie," Bobby murmured against her hair, "and found our greatest truth," she finished. The fog rolled in, wrapping around them like a familiar embrace. But unlike those early days of uncertainty and hidden feelings, they now stood solid in their love, their truth, their shared future. Their story had become more than just a romance. It was a revolution of the heart, a testament to love's power to transcend boundaries and transform lives. But in this moment, they were simply Bobby and Bondi, two souls who had found each other against all odds and chosen to love without limits. As night fell over San Francisco, they held each other close, their hearts beating in perfect rhythm. No more masks, no more pretense, no more boxes trying to contain what they felt. Just love, in all its beautiful, boundless glory. They had written a new kind of love story, one that proved that when hearts are brave enough to love honestly, magic happens. And as they shared one more kiss under the stars, they knew that their greatest adventure was still unfolding, one truth, one day, one moment of authentic love at a time. 1. Love knows no boundaries and can't be defined by society's labels. 2. Being true to yourself is more powerful than pretending to be someone else. 3. The bravest thing you can do is listen to your heart, even when others doubt you. 4. Real love transforms people into their best, most authentic selves. 5. When we stand together in truth, we can overcome any obstacle life throws at us.